This is an interview with Reverend J.R. Calloway for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute today, September 25th, 1996. Reverend Calloway, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and sit with us today, talk with us about Birmingham and its history and the movement. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Good, good. I just want to start by asking you about your family. Were you born in Birmingham?
In the Birmingham vicinity, yes.
Okay.
The area they call Oxford.
Out in Oxmoor, right across Red Mountain.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's out in Reverend Shellsworth territory.
That's where he and I came up together. We attended school out there in Oxford together.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What, were your parents originally from that area? Did they move into
They moved in there from a place they called Hope, Alabama.
Hope
Down below Montgomery,
Okay.
Montgomery County.
Yeah, I was just in Hope 2 weeks ago.
Is that right?
Yeah. I had a friend who passed, and they were from that
From that
area.
area, yeah.
So we went back down to
Okay.
Yeah, Hope, Alabama.
Hope, Alabama. That's it.
Yeah. So at what, when your mother and father came, did they have children before they
No.
came? How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have had two brothers. They both passed on. I have one sister who lives in Cleveland now.
Oh, okay. So you had a relatively small family for the
Very small,
time.
yeah, at that time.
How did your mother and father, how far in school did they go?
My mother completed high school. My father went to the 9th grade, I understand.
And what schools did they go to?
My mother attended what was called at that time Industrial High.
Right.
It's now Park, I think it is.
That's right.
She was at that school. Now, I don't remember what my father attended. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of work did your mother do? Did she work outside of the home?
No, she was a housewife.
She was a housewife. And what did your father do?
He was a farmer.
He was a farmer.
Yeah.
Farmer in Oxmoor.
Farmer in
Is that right? Did you own the land that you lived on?
We owned the land that we lived on, but we didn't own the land we farmed on.
Oh, okay. But he was farming for himself,
For himself,
right? Not for
it's not a
someone.
sharecropper.
Okay.
It was his farming, yeah.
And tell me just a bit about what it was like growing up in Oxmoor.
It was a really strenuous thing, but an enjoyable one. We had feed the hogs, the cows, and pastures. We cleaned the farm, the fields out, and all this kind of thing. But it was interesting.
Yeah.
We had family.
Oh, yes.
We had family.
Tell me about school. What do you remember going to first grade?
I remember very well going to the first grade.
What was it like?
It was frightening, exciting. Mr. Ramsey at that time, who was Mr. Howard Johnson's step-grandfather, was my first principal at Oxmoor Junior High School. And then in later years, in 35, they built the old building that's out there now.
The old white
The
building.
old white building,
Yes.
And that's now a church.
Okay.
It's called the Macedonia Christian Church, but at that time it was our school.
What do you remember about going to school there, those elementary days?
Those were very good days. My man teacher there was Mr. John W. Redden. I remember him so well. He was one of those that I'm inspired by some of his actions and teaching now, because he had a vocabulary that was second to none. And I've adopted much of that from Mr. Redden. He passed on some years ago, but he was one of my mentors. And I wanted to be somewhat like him as much as possible.
So in fact, he still lives through you.
Within me, he does.
Yeah, well, that's great. You went to Oxmoor Elementary School,
Yeah,
junior high school.
junior high.
Where did you go to high school?
Rosedale High.
Rosedale.
Then Rosedale, yeah.
Okay. How did you get from Oxmoor to Rosedale?
we had a bus. The Jefferson County system had a bus. Bus number 141.
Mm.
It was driven by a man named Joe Smith. He's passed on since that time, but that's how we went to high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now you were right across the mountain from Winona.
Exactly so.
Why did any of the children in that area go to Winona?
I understand that there were some, I don't know why they transferred us to Rosedale, where it was Homewood, but Rosedale High School then.
Right.
And now why they did this, I've never been able to find out.
Mm-hmm.
I think Reverend Shuttleworth went to Powderly High at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and he lived at Oxford at the same time.
Oh, okay. Yes. Many people don't know or don't remember there was a Powderly High School at
It
one
was a
time.
Powderly High School right there. And I think at one point they had school in the Birmingham Baptist College.
Mm-hmm.
It was not functioning quite well at that time, so this is where they had a Powderly High School.
That's right. Yes. What do you remember about your high school days?
I enjoyed those. We had a principal, Dr. B.M. Montgomery, was an ideal principal, and my mentor, Mr. Augustus Caesar Dickinson, was my teacher, and he is, incidentally, he's the only one of my teachers at that time who is yet alive.
Hmm.
He lives over here in Smithfield on the north side.
Is that right? You see him periodically?
Every once in a while, and I talk to him quite frequently.
Are there any events in your high school career that stand out in your mind?
Yes, quite a number of them. The school was at that time really interested in students.
Mm-hmm.
And Mrs. Thompson, Jeanette Thompson, who was my English teacher, and Mr. Archie McCord, who all these were people who were instrumental in our getting our algebra, English, and we had a family even in school.
Hmm.
And I was inspired by that just a great deal.
It sounds as if your high school days were very similar to what was happening at home. You talk about family and each instance. Why is that the case? Why was that?
At that time, before integration came, all the teachers there who had children, they thought of our continuing family traditions, uniting and helping one another. Those were the things that they went about to instruct us, and it helped us to have a closeness, a cohesiveness that made us pretty well grow together.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not forgotten that. It comes up large in my mind sometimes now.
Mm-hmm. What year did you finish Rosedale?
I finished Rosedale in May of 1943.
May of 43.
Yeah.
After you finished high school, what did you do?
I went in service.
Hmm.
I was called in service on May the 18th. And I was to graduate that same time, and Mr. Montgomery had me deferred so I could graduate. And in July of 1943, I went in service.
You joined the Army?
I went in the Army. I was drafted. I didn't join.
Okay. So they called you.
They called me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where did you go from here when you went into
In
service?
the service?
Yes, sir.
Fort Benning, Georgia.
Fort Benning, that's where you did your basic training?
No, I did my basic training in Fort McClellan.
Oh,
But I was inducted in Fort Benning, and they shipped me from there to Fort McClellan. That's where I took 13 weeks of basic.
okay. And what did you do after basic training?
Came home for a 14-day furlough, and then to the South Pacific,
To the South Pacific.
in Manila.
Yeah. A young man from Birmingham, Alabama, Oxmoor community,
Yeah,
all the way to Manila.
all the way to Manila.
What was that transition like?
Oh, it was really something to think about. It was baffling.
Hmm.
I think about it now. I enjoyed the experience, and I wouldn't take thousands of dollars for the experience, but I wouldn't give 10 cents to go through it again.
Say after it's over, it's okay.
It's okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. What was being in the military like?
Well, it was a continuation of something I was under guidance by, and I had to follow instructions, which was not hard for me. I did not mind being told what to do, and it helped me a great deal. And I think much of my manhood now has stemmed from what I've got out of service. Pretty well, I learned how to march, I learned how to dress, I learned how to make up a bed, and I did all of this according to the Army style. And I'm still like that.
So the amount of discipline there.
That's right, discipline.
Yes.
Yeah.
In your days here in Birmingham, prior to going, Birmingham, of course, was a segregated city.
Very much so, yeah.
And you went into a segregated army.
I did.
Were there any differences in the ways in which you were treated in Birmingham versus in the army?
It was. It was similar because in Fort McClellan, where we took our basic, I was in company C, and A and B company were white. They supposed to have been together, all four companies, A, B, C, and D. But the two black companies were C and D, and the A and B were from crossover, we could not mix. But we were the same company.
Well, when you got to Manila, did the entire company go over?
The entire company went over.
When you got to Manila, were there any differences?
Very little. They still had it segregated there. The Army did. Yeah.
Did you experience the war itself?
No, I did not. I did not. I was in the 97th Engineers, and we built bridges, made preparations for the Army to cross where we needed to go. So we had no problem there at all. I did not hear gunfire.
Is that right?
No, I was not shell shocked. I was not injured by anything. No.
Did you meet people, the inhabitants of
I
Manila?
did, yeah.
What was that experience like?
That was a great experience. The people there were people that talked a language they called Tagalog. And we had to learn a little of theirs. They took ours, and they were very poor people. It was a very poor neighborhood, and I saw them eat the food that we were pretty well throwing away. And that bothered me because I hate to see people do things like that, but it was a way of survival, and they did it. Yeah.
And how long did you remain in Manila?
I was in Manila 3 years and 2 months, and then went to another place they called Angeles.
Where is that?
That was about 150 miles away from there. I forgot what it is, but that was the name of it. Still over in South Pacific.
Okay.
And after that was over, I came home in 47.
How did you get there to Manila? A ship.
I shipped there. They weren't transporting us in planes at that time.
I see.
It took us 22 days, I think it was, on the ship. And that crossing over in the ship was a terrible thing for me.
Why?
Well, it made me seasick. We left on the 20th of September, and that night I was sick as I could be.
Did you get any better? Did you
Oh,
get
yes,
sick for
it
the
happened.
entire time?
No. Just 2 days, and after that I was able to walk around. But I think they moving up and down the ship made me sick. Well, a lot of us got seasick.
Right.
Yeah.
First time.
First time, yeah. But coming back, I didn't get sick at all.
Is that right? Well, upon your return to Birmingham, did you come back to
I
Birmingham?
came back to Birmingham.
What, did you move back to the home?
Back to Oxmoor, back to,
Oxmoor?
yeah.
And what did you do? What kind of work did you do?
I started working for the Birmingham Steel. And after that, I got married in 48. And then I just went back to Miles College, and that's where I finished at Miles College.
So in '48, you went back to Miles and you started school, and then you finished there.
Yeah.
You finished there in '52.
54.
54. Now, during this period, this was a rather, a period when voter registration was at least being discussed, and the NACP was active in that. Were you a registered voter at that time?
I registered shortly thereafter. I was not a registered, when I came back from overseas, got married, I was not a registered voter, but after it was being so discussed and certain requirements, and it seemed as if they didn't want us to register, but there were some of us who went ahead and registered, and for that I'm grateful.
Were you able to register the very first time that you came back?
I was able to register without having to pay what they call poll tax because I was a veteran. And that's one advantage that was to me. I didn't have to pay any tax to get registered.
Did you have to take a test?
I had to take a test, yeah.
What
But
was the test like?
it was not strenuous, just a few questions. But I was able to go through that, having been in school those days and having been in the army. Made it kind of easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were not asked the question, for instance, how many pebbles of sand on the seashore or anything.
Nothing simple like that. It was very, very rapid. They went through very rapid.
Right. 1955 was the Montgomery bus boycott.
Right.
Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yeah.
That being in Montgomery, which is about 100 miles from Birmingham. But that then had an effect upon what was happening in Birmingham, because as a result of that, the NACP was outlawed from operating in the state.
Right.
As a result of that, the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights was organized.
It was.
Were you a member of the Alabama Christian Movement from the beginning?
Not in its total inception, but just a few months thereafter, I did join with it.
Right. Yeah, you knew Fred Shuttlesworth.
Quite
We
well.
grew up with him.
He and I grew up together.
And did he enlist you into the movement? How did you get involved?
When I found out that he was involved, knowing him, having come up with him, inspired me to just unite. So when I heard where they were meeting, I did that.
Now, you were a minister at that time?
I started my ministry in '54.
Okay.
Yeah. And in '56, I was called to Tabernacle Baptist Church, which is my first church.
Okay.
Stayed there 7 years, and the Christian movement meeting met at that church quite often.
Okay, so you were one of those pastors that allowed
It to be at our church, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that there were ministers that would not allow.
There were some who would not allow, who did not allow.
Was there an organization of ministers at the time, like what's the organization now? Ministerial Alliance?
The Birmingham Baptist Ministers Conference was the strong element in the city at that time. Dr. Calloway was president.
Were they supportive of the movement as a body?
As a body, but there were individuals who did not really participate. But as a body, it was.
Right.
Dr. Ware was a very strong civil rights man.
I know that one of the things that kept the movement going were the mass meetings.
It was.
You attended mass meetings.
I attended mass meetings.
How would you describe a typical mass meeting?
It was, there was at that time no church large enough to hold the crowd. I mean, they really came out and they looked forward to it every Monday night. And enthusiastic they were. And Brother Shuttlesworth, being president, was always an outgoing person. Strong, and he had very vibrant, he was strong-willed. And of course, that came out of his own family because he came from a family like that. But we did support it, and it was very well received by most people.
What actually took place in the meetings?
discussion on what was going on in the city, the need for our supporting financial, and if we need somebody to do certain things, we could always deputize someone, and they were willing to share in that regard. It was not hard to get people to volunteer to do what was needed. If Reverend Shuttleworth asked for it, it was about going to be done.
Were many of your members involved?
Most of them at Tabernacle at that time were definitely involved, and the church where I am now, Reverend J.S. Pfeiffer was pastor of the church where I am now.
What church?
Zion Star Baptist Church. That was at that time 2611 4th Avenue South, and we later moved in 701 to 254 3rd Avenue Southwest. That's where we are now. But Reverend Pfeiffer was one of the staunch supporters of that movement, and he and Reverend Shuttleworth were ideal good friends in that regard. Yeah. So the church where I was serving at Tabernacle was supported. The church at Zion Star was supported.
What was your role? What did you do?
During the year that we had the march with the children,
That's 1963.
63. It was the year that I went to the church where I am now. But I used my car and getting the children to go bring them downtown and transported them wherever they needed to support the idea of getting schools integrated, that kind of thing.
Right. You transported children from
That school
the
to
schools.
wherever meeting was.
Did you go out to encourage students
I
to
did.
get involved?
I did that.
How was that done? I've heard of that.
Well, we made our arrival on the campus, and they were anxious to see us come. And I have gotten some information from Rev. Shuttleworth, what we should talk about, how to encourage them. And Dr. Ariel Alford was one of those who supported. He was at Sardis at that time. And they would help us, and we would tell the children how to get involved, and they did. And it was a very fine thing. They were very jubilant about it.
What was the reception that you received from the faculty and principals of the various schools?
Many of them, if they resented it, they said little about it. And so they wanted it to be changed, but being where they were and their jobs, they could not afford to be out front too much at that time because you couldn't talk about it and keep a job. So they were supportive.
What's your, did you demonstrate at any point?
No, I did not demonstrate.
What was the most memorable occurrence that you may have that relates to the movement? If I was to ask you, what stands out most in your mind about the movement, what would that be?
I think the movement was quite productive. I saw some things that, particularly when they was integrating Phillips School, when Rev. Shuttleworth was so brutally beaten.
Were you with him that day?
I was up there that particular day.
Did you actually see?
I saw them. They beat him with sticks, with ropes. I think it might have been chains, but this was a terrible morning. And I really don't see how he's alive today with the way he was beaten that day on Phillips campus.
Well, you were there, a black man. Were you accosted in any way by the mob at that time?
No.
Or was that focused simply on Shuttlesworth and his family?
I think it was on Shuttleworth and his family. And we did get men to watch his house thereafter. But there were any number of ministers and other blacks around that time this was happening. But we didn't go out there to get anything happen to us as it did Rev. Shuttleworth.
So you were one of the guards for the house and the church?
I didn't serve as one of the guards. I did serve as one of those to help to get them out there, transport them out there, and then pick them up. But I didn't go out to guard the house.
Right. Were other members of your family involved?
No.
Why not?
Well, my brothers were younger than I, and they were working, probably working. So I guess to keep that job, they couldn't let it be known that they were out there.
What about your wife?
My wife was not involved. She was a little timid with that.
What was her response to your involvement?
Sometimes she didn't want me to go, but she didn't, in a strong way, try to prohibit me, but she did talk against it.
As you reflect on those days, what do you feel was the benefits, the real benefits of the children participating in the movement at that time?
I think it had some good advantages because we had been led to believe that the other race of people were better than we were. And for us to get the idea to see that they were people that we were, I think they helped us in that regard.
When did you get the idea that they were people just as you are? Because at that time, of course, the police and the fire department were really coming down very hard on people.
Yeah.
So at what point did you feel that you learned that this was, in fact,
It was after some time passed between that, and as my mind reflected on their being out there, they were there. That I saw that they had to eat like I had to eat. They had to wear clothes like I did, and I started considering to me and said, well, they were just people like I am. But that didn't happen overnight. That was a process.
Sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, I think you made a statement about before integration. How would you compare the times before integration and then after integration?
Before integration, they had black and white water, black and white toilets, black and white restaurants, and this kind of thing. And we could not go in certain places to eat because how much money you had, no accommodations on highways and this kind of thing. That was before integration. After that, we were privileged to go eat where we wanted. Though we may not have had as much money, but we were privileged to go. So before that, it was quite horrible, I thought. But after I came up under it, it didn't bother me because I didn't really know that it was another side. But when I found out that there was another side, then my disturbance got higher. I was really appalled by that kind of thing. Yeah.
Did you ever experience any racial incidents
No, I did not.
with police or with any white people? Why was that? I mean, many people talk about having incidents, but others say, well, no, they never did.
Now, why it didn't happen to me, I really don't know. I had no encounter with police. I had no encounter on highways with anybody. I pretty well knew where I could and could not go. And well, at the time, Mr. Hunter, to be perfectly frank, I was not one of those who would push out that. I had to grow to be nonviolent. Or I was not one of those persons who could take that. And I didn't push out that because I knew my temperament. And I've grown different from that now, but I was young and I just couldn't take something. So I didn't go out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you worked at where did you work?
Republic Steel.
Republic
That was
Steel,
I did sport.
What did you do at Republic Steel?
I was what you used to call a filter helper, where they would melt the ore and then let it run through what we call a filter. And there was a lot of bags were there that we get to change because that ore would come through those filters and then move on to something else. And that's the kind of work I was doing. But it was one of the other men was the main man. I was just his helper. Yeah.
A white man was
White
the
man
man.
was the main man.
And, well, could you ever move up to his position?
Not at that time.
Mhm.
Not at that time.
Where was Republic still? Is that in Bethel?
That's Spalding, right?
In Spalding, oh, okay.
Right out here.
Uh,
They've changed all of that now.
yeah. Was that at the mine?
That's mine.
Okay. Did
But
you work
I
in the
didn't, I
mine?
didn't work in that mine. I did work in one of the TCNI mines at one time, but not in the Spalding mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you do in the TCI mine?
It was a timber pepper.
Okay.
We put timbers under the rocks to keep them from falling,
Mm.
to give us some sign that they were going to fall.
Yeah. What mine did you work in?
That was number 11 mine I did in East Scooter.
11.
Yeah.
Okay. Were you, let's see, you finished high school in 43. Were you ever a member of the union, the mine mill and snuff
Oh,
work?
yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
Well, that was, you had to be that then. Your life wasn't worth too much because they did not want scabs.
And anyone that was not a part of the union,
No,
they
no.
considered them to be
They
scab.
called those scabs. But if you were a part of that union, you supported it, and they might have done things with which you did not agree, but you couldn't verbalize it. 'Cause, you come up missing.
Mm. So the union was pretty tough.
It's pretty tough at that time.
Well, what years did you work in the mine and were a member of the union? Was that after your military
No,
experience?
no, it was prior to my military experience.
Prior to your military experience.
Yeah. And I came to Spalding mine, not in the mine, but in the plant,
Mhm.
after coming back out of the service.
Oh, okay. But you were not a part of the initial organization of mine mill and stuff.
That was already going on
Yeah.
young, when I was very young, as a child.
Yeah. Who do you remember any of the men, the names of the people that were involved with that were in official positions? I know. Did you know Marion Reynolds? Marion Reynolds was the president down in the Winona.
Yeah. You around?
Yeah. And Mr. Allen, Frank Allen.
Frank Allen
was national representative.
Yeah, and there was another man in Bessemer. I was trying to think of him.
Asbury Howard.
Asbury Howard. He was strong in that thing.
Yeah. How did you see the union? Was the union helpful or was it?
It was helpful because if anything happened to you that was indicative of race, want to fight you because of your race, then the union would go to and make an appeal for you. And they would pretty well get your job back if you were not in fault of something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you around when the USWA came in and acquired actually won the consent election to replace mine mill? Were you around then? This was in 48 and 49.
Oh, well, if so, I was not directly involved.
How do you think that the union had anything to do with the preparation for Birmingham for the movement that would come in the 60s?
I think so.
How?
I think so because had it not been for the union, they would not have known the stick-to-itness, the closeness that existed within the Negro race, and they saw that we were bound to be together. So I think it did help in a great deal in that respect.
So were there men who were involved in the union? Did they get involved in the movement?
If they did, it was that kind of offered a little bit because they didn't come directly to it, but they would give you their support.
Right.
If it was financial, if you needed assistance, they would do it, but they didn't come out to it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to just share with us about your life here in Birmingham, about the movement, about your activities on the job, any of those incidents that could sort of enlighten us? What we're trying to do is just to really draw a picture of what Birmingham was like in those days.
Mr. Allah, I think that as I look back over Birmingham, where she was and where she is, it's quite a contrast. We had in those times, rough times, really, really rough times, and problems that we had to try and solve among ourselves without making anybody to whom we could appeal to help us.
Problems like what that we had to solve among ourselves?
We had to learn how to, when it came for the bank, said that we could not borrow money. We had to come together and try to make a way for ourselves, even the school system. Mr. Carroll Hayes and others who were helping in that regard. Had it not been for those fellows, I don't know how we would have made it. But they sought to corral us, tell us what was good for us as a race, and they helped us in a lot of ways. They talked to us, they encouraged us, get an education, knowing to handle situations where you could deal with it, how to be a man. It was Mr. Hayes good on that.
So you're saying that the educated group was very helpful.
Very helpful. Very helpful.
Okay, well, I certainly appreciate your time because you helped to paint that picture of Birmingham and what it was like. Because I think it's really important for us to understand that those communities, there were smaller communities such as Oxford,
Right.
that filters into Birmingham, that helps Birmingham to become what it would eventually become.
Right.
Communities like Escudo, we know in North Dakota,
All of
those are very similar kinds of
they
communities.
were pretty well identical.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. I enjoyed it.